good evening once again here from Texas. Not much weather going on this evening. You can see the clear skies there, a little bit of cirrus up there at about 30,000 feet. A little bit of haze showing up there in the sky, but where's all the weather? Well, we're under high pressure in our part of Texas. Let's take a look at the charts here. And there it is. High pressure across pretty much all of the southern U.S., and we're right underneath the high, so excellent flying conditions for the drone this evening. The storm tracks are definitely up there in Canada. We can shift this up there, and just kind of a series of low pressure areas all the way from British Columbia out to Ontario. It does look like the cold air has abated somewhat. We look up in the Northwest Territories, and we're looking at about maybe 0 to -15 up there, about 0 to 11 in Yukon. However, it does look like possibly the northern regions of Canada are going to be recharging, and I'll show you why here shortly. Before we get too much further, let me just take a quick look at the chat, make sure everything is shaping up good. Let's see, we got Sue M here, and Ron Chalfant, Electric Dog, David Holcomb, Fun with Tech, David Moore, reporting beautiful morning in Northwest Texas, and the beautiful evening, the Metroplex. Andrew Hotchkiss, nice drone footage, thank you. Yeah, I'm pretty pleased with how it came out there. We have Burl H. and Blocksick and Adam Davis feeling the cold again. 23 in Clarion and Jason Boggs mentioning Joel Taylor passed away last night. And to be perfectly honest, I don't recognize the name, but I am, when one of the chasers in the community has passed, that's always a sad thing there. So yeah, definitely my condolences there, and I'll be looking into that a little bit more after I get off the air tonight. Also, Mike Estwick joining us, and Ron Chalfant reporting the audio is good. Okay, let's head on into the maps here. Okay, that's probably a little further ahead than I want to be, but we'll start with this thickness and isobars here. So it does look like the Pacific is a bit stormy. So we're going to look at this on the GFS a little bit. Large Gulf of Alaska high out there, west of British Columbia, and looks like one of the first waves coming on shore in Oregon and Washington there. And I guess not too sure where the warm front's going to be. Maybe I'm inclined to put one actually down here in California due to those three thickness lines right there, and that would make the remainder of it an occluded front all the way back up into there. And these are definitely up here occluded lows. There's Texas underneath this big high pressure area. It extends all the way down into Mexico, so they are getting, you can see some of this ridging here on the east coast of Mexico, and the high goes all the way up, looks like all the way up into the Hudson Bay area. So as soon as this center of the high moves eastward, then we're going to see some warm air start to come in from the south. And we've got our outgoing system out over the Canadian Maritimes right there. Okay, on the radar, let's see, not much going on except out in the western U.S. Things getting a little active out in that region. And let's see, what do we want to go with here? I didn't get the satellite loops loaded up. Let me get that going here. And I think maybe we'll take a look out west for tonight. Maybe we'll take kind of a broad picture there. Let me get the form set up. We'll do a little animation. And here we go. And this should show some of the activity out there in the Pacific. There's our system coming on shore. They're in Oregon, and you can see we've got a really large system out over the central part of the Pacific here, and another one lined up even further east. And then you can see this large area of occlusion. This is all very cold air, and you can see the extensive blue and green colors indicating very cold temperatures compared to like what you see out here in the southwest U.S. So, yeah, very cold conditions out in that occlusion area. And I think we haven't really done any soundings. Maybe we should do a bit of that. Now, earlier you probably noticed that we had a little bit of haze. Let me see if I can bring that chart up again. Yeah, that's what it looked like earlier. And you can see a little bit of what looks like smoke. There was probably a fire somewhere in the area. Definitely, that's too brown to be dust or anything like that. That's going to be smoke there. So that suggests that there is an occlusion, or not an occlusion, an inversion. So pretty much right away we know what we're going to see when we pull up the charts. Let me switch over to the soundings. And there you go. You can see this is probably what that smoke is piling up underneath. Little inversion there at about 8,000 feet. So it's probably kind of sitting right in there. Very dry column, surprisingly. This is the Fort Worth sounding, and you can see that the dew points start out in the low 20s, and they get much drier as you get higher in the atmosphere, and by the time you're up to about 15,000 feet, dew points are about minus 60 to minus 70 Fahrenheit. That's very dry for this time of year up in the mid-levels. But we've probably had quite a bit of subsidence, and maybe we've had a little bit of a tropopause fold. Maybe that's brought some of the dry air in from downward from the stratosphere as that last system pushed by. Pretty good jet, though, aloft there, seeing about 90 knot winds. And we'll just take a look around elsewhere around the country. We'll take a look on the west coast at Salem, Oregon. And yeah, very moist column there, and you can see that the tropopause is a little bit lower, down at about 30,000 feet. All of this here, that's all the stratosphere up in this region of the chart. And with the southwest flow, that's telling us that the upper level lows are to the northwest of Oregon. And pretty good southwesterly flow. And normally when we see winds like that in Oregon and Northern California, that's going to be associated with some wet weather. And certainly that's going on in that region right now. Take a look out east at Brookhaven, New York City. And very strong inversion there. There's that inversion right there. And some cold polar air near the surface. These are, keep in mind that this is an evening sounding, so looking at about 30 degrees. And as you go up to about 4,000 feet, the column is very cold up at that level. So conditions down in the teens at that level. But then they stay kind of isothermal all the way up. And then above that, we've got some tropical air. And I say that's tropical because as you bring that down to the surface, usually I go with a lapse rate kind of like that, and we get into the 50s as that drops down to the surface. So basically I'm extending that column all the way down, and that's probably what it would be like. It would look like this if the column was didn't have this polar air here. So this is a layer here of probably a slightly modified maritime tropical air, and then below that probably a little maritime polar or continental polar down under that. But tropopause is very low, and that's because we're back there in that trough area in New York. And then we'll take a look down in New York, Florida. Yeah, I mean, probably quite a few people from New York down there at this time of the year. And we've got kind of a moist adiabatic lapse rate all the way up, and quite a bit of moisture all the way up to about 10,000 feet. So this is what we would see with maybe some scattered showers in that part of Florida. Dew points in the mid-60s, and pretty well loaded with moisture all the way up to about 6,000 feet. So another way we can look at the weather across the U.S. is with temperature anomalies. And this is definitely useful for analysis because we can use this to find fronts. And, you know, we've been doing this for the past couple months here. And we can also kind of get an idea of the character of the fronts. As you can see across the U.S., there's not any tight gradients at all. Everything's pretty subtle shades of red and blue. The transitions are very gradual. So this is indicative of a lot of high pressure over the U.S. there. So it's spreading the temperature contrast away from each other. And they are bunched up a little bit in the western U.S., and part of that is due to the terrain in that region. But as you go up to Canada, the temperature contrasts are a little bit tighter. So we can probably pick out a front, maybe something like that there coming out of Manitoba, and another front further back up north. So probably something like that going on right there. So yeah, you can definitely use this for your analysis and reconcile that with a surface chart. And let's see, anything else we want to pick out? Yeah, you can see that all the cold air bunched up there on the Mexican coast. So they are getting kind of a cold snap in that region there. But the tail end of it not going much further east than the inland area, maybe something like that there. Okay. Let's move ahead and see if we can get some satellite data going. The Polar Orbiter. This is the worldview.earthdata.nasa.gov site, and sometimes I use this to look at Aqua and Terra. So we're just waiting for this to come up here. Bring this up to January 24th. And that's kind of a look what's going on. You can see the little bit of the snow across northern Canada, but a lot of this is old snow. And there is going to be a change here in the next week or so. And I've got some charts lined up to show you as far as that goes. And then out in the Pacific there, you can see the occluded system, very wound up, low pressure areas right there. And let's see if we can zoom in on that. Sometimes you can see some really neat stuff. But yeah, it's very unstable out there, even though it's cold. There's some steep lapse rates out there in the Pacific, and you go from cold to very cold aloft. And so we get these shallow cumulonimbus clouds like you see here, very showery weather, and sometimes even some snow showers embedded in that. And all of this is unstable cumuliform clouds. And then we go east to the California coast and we pick up the baroclinic cloud forms. That's associated with a cold front coming onshore. Maybe something like that right there. And as far as that warm front, I'm not too sure. Maybe probably something like that possibly going on. And then this would go on up into the offshore areas from Washington as an included front. All right, so I guess, let me see. I think that pretty much covers everything for the analysis. Let me take a look at the chat here. Some discussion about Joel Taylor there. Rat Bastard was watching a stretch of Storm Chaser episodes this week. Thought he passed away a few years back. And just reading through here, audio 5x5. He was the driver for Reed Timmer in the Discovery show Storm Chasers. Okay. Megan John reporting 27 degrees there in Minnesota. Mr. Manlet, a little late to the party there. And Brian Toomey's also joining us, New York Canadian Snowbirds. Mr. Manlet, interested to see if that Blue Norther will show up in the GFS again. Andrew Hotchkiss, College to Page, showing about 5 fires across central Texas. And that's what we were seeing there just on that other screen grab. I think that is going to be smoke about a good 30 or 40 miles off on the western horizon. And Ron Chalfant says the west coast front would be a cata front. I'm not too sure what we have right now. Typically they're ana fronts. I would probably have to do some more analysis and look at the charts. But let's see if we can scroll down there and see if we can pick something out. It's pretty well defined there. It looks like it's coming on shore just east of Eureka, starting to cross the mountains around Medford. Probably, yeah, I think they've pretty much nailed this, and maybe this recurves just west of Seattle, maybe something like that. Okay. And most of the precip is, well, there's some out ahead of it, but I don't know. I'm not too sure where that precip field is in relation to that. I think I would probably have to, yeah, I might as well show you guys since I have you here. Let me switch over and go back to the GO satellite. That's not a good frame, but yeah, it does kind of look like some of the clouds are out ahead of that. Let me zoom in on that. I'll switch to the close-up sector. Set this up here and zoom in. Okay. So there's kind of a close-up look at the west coast, showing a very strong baroclinic system coming on shore. And yeah, it kind of seems like a catafront there. I think Ron may be onto something there. Let me stop that and draw on top of that. So that's the latest frame there, 8 p.m. And yeah, looks like her front is something like that. I think some of that up there is going to be included, but somewhere in here, I think probably, you see how the cloud field kind of bunches out like this? Usually when I see that, I'm starting, you know, that kind of clues me in that the warm front may be a little bit south of there, so maybe I would be looking for a boundary somewhere in there. And then the rest of that up there would be an included system. And then the other aspect of that is the thermal field, and that's really what counts. So one thermal field that we looked at was the thickness chart, and that was this right here, and that was hinting at a little bit of a thermal gradient in there in Nevada and Northern California. So thickness would probably bring the front a little bit further south. On the other hand, if we look at the surface, we've got 57 degrees around Pendleton. So we are bringing some warm air north. So let's take a look at the potential temperature. Okay, so looking at this, we've got some pretty warm temperatures in Nevada. So maybe we're actually a little bit warm there. And it doesn't look like we pick up the temperature falls till we get up around the Snake River, the Columbia River. So this might suggest something like that right there. And potential temperature going for a little bit of packing there, so I wonder if something like that might be going on. Okay, so there's a couple of ways we can analyze this, and let me just go ahead and bring up some plots. Okay, so there we go. There's the plots. You can see we've got 49 to 51 there in Northern California. I think that probably is post-frontal air. And then we go into the Nevada deserts and things are warmer, so that might put the front a little bit further to the east, maybe something like that. So this is kind of the process of reconciling all of the data. And then I would take that and go back and look at the thickness chart and see if maybe that could actually work out. And yeah, and you see now I've found something. See up here, 21Z? That's slightly old. So let's see if we can bring that up to the current time. There's 9Z. Okay, so there's the 3Z chart. That's going to be 9 p.m. Central. And yeah, this does bring the cold air a little bit further east into northeast California there. So that's probably what I would go with for our position, and maybe, yeah, I think this is probably what we got going on there. So go back to the ghost chart. So I think we're kind of back to our antifront positioning. And then the warm front, I think that's going to be somewhat up there near the Columbia River, and probably that little cloud field associated with some of the uplift with that warm front. And this cloud field here, that could be upper level energy moving through. I'm not too sure that that is isentropic lift. We can switch over to the 500 millibar heights and vorticity to get some insight onto that. And let's roll that back to the current time. Yeah, there's 3Z right there, and we can see what looks like a little bit of a shortwave there in Nevada. So we're probably getting some lift there and maybe some interaction with the subtropical jet in that area. All right, let's go ahead and head into the forecast. So starting out, we've got our system coming onshore there in on the west coast. Pretty good trough there, and we'll roll that forward. The trough comes onshore tonight, and that moves into the Great Basin area during the day tomorrow. It looks like another trough maybe coming in from the backside there. You see it kind of slowed down there for a second, and now it's opening up or moving into the northern plains there on Friday. Looks like there may be a couple of troughs in that system. So that moves out into the central plains and the Midwest for the weekend. Then we get some ridging along the west coast, and you see this big low pressure area, this big low height. Pretty good storm system coming together out there in the Gulf of Alaska, and that's spinning around right there. And a couple waves coming off that. There comes one wave, and that's going to move through on Thursday. So about 5 days down the line, another system coming into the Midwest. And it looks like it's going to be fairly quiet in Texas. Maybe we'll get a bit of the tail end of that. However, as we get this ridging on the west coast like that and this troughing, that's a good recipe for cold air, because that's going to try to dislodge polar air. And not only that, when we get this ridging, you see the southwesterly flow in here in the Pacific. That can bring some pretty significant moisture into western Canada, and dumping snow on western and central Canada and putting a fresh blanket down, that can help excuse me, insulate the ground, and that can strongly accelerate the development of Arctic air in that region. So yeah, this is kind of a this is a pattern here I would look at for Arctic air development. And I did bring up one interesting chart here. The worst polar outbreak in modern times. Well, there was one in '89, but the big one is 1983. Maybe some of you might remember this. Christmas of '83, pretty much everywhere east of the Rockies got some really, really cold air, and there was about, I want to say maybe 15 or 20 days of below freezing in Dallas. That was the big thing that I heard from way back then was the plumbers there in Dallas had so much work that they didn't know what to do with it, busted pipes everywhere. But let's take a look at the charts and kind of acquaint you with how this happened. This is the surface chart, and you can see this is only on December 19th. So it hadn't even really started, but you can see we've already got this polar high covering the eastern U.S. And it's not a particularly strong high-pressure area. If we look at the temperatures, morning temperatures about 17, and it got up to about 36 that day. So this isn't really like super cold or anything like that. In fact, let me show you the temperatures. This is the high and low for the 19th. I don't like this deja vu very much. Okay. There we go. So 36, 16, that's kind of on the cold side, but not too bad. And you can see up north, yeah, there's some below zero temperatures up there. However, Here's the upper level chart, and you can see the characteristic look there of long wave troughing in the central and eastern U.S. and ridging out over the Pacific. So we end up with this jet pattern that comes south from the Arctic region down the west coast, down across British Columbia, and this is a migratory trough here coming southward, moving like that. So let's show you how this unfolded. Well, here's a surface system associated with that trough moving through Colorado. This is on the 20th, and then on the 21st, it's basically moving on top of the cold dome right there. There's more cold air coming south out of Canada. Now we're kind of in between. There's probably another system coming through. And just more high pressure there. And now we see the pressure's really come up. Let me compare that to the previous day. This is the 23rd, and you can see that the pressures are on the order of 1033 millibars, 1028, 1035. That's not particularly high. But the next day, now look at the pressures. We got 1054 millibars, and even over Montana, 1060 millibars, and that's up near, let me do the conversion on that. Uh, 1060 millibars divided by 33.8636. That's 31.30 inches on the barometer there. So that's some super, that's usually about as high of a pressure as we see in about maybe 8 or 9 years. So that's a huge chunk of cold air coming southward, and then on the next day, things are looking like this. Starting out in the morning, these are temperatures at 7 a.m. 6 degrees in Dallas, -5 in Wichita, -13 at St. Louis, -13 at Chicago, -9 at Cleveland, and 1 degree at Atlanta. And even down in Miami, 41 there. So yeah, this is, it's not only the temperatures that were a big thing, it was the length of this cold spell over time. It was multiple weeks there. And before we wrap this up, let me just show you the temperatures on Christmas Eve of 83. There you go there. 12 degrees for a high in Dallas, and -11 for Chicago, -4 at Denver, and I'm seeing about 1 degree at Cincinnati. And then just to show you the upper level pattern, not much change, but just kind of a river coming southward from the Arctic region. So how does that compare with what we have right now? Let's take a look. Let me bring this up to later in the time frame. This is on the 2nd of February. Well, that looks familiar, doesn't it? Polar vortex there over northern Hudson Bay. Flow coming, there's the ridge right there off the west coast, troughing on the east coast. So this can be a setup for polar air in February. We don't really know if that's actually going to happen, but this is kind of a signal that we need to kind of pay attention here. All right. So yeah, it looks like this pattern locks in starting around, well, here you can see we're zonal around the 28th, 29th. And by zonal, we're talking about the jet stream going like that. It's pretty much west to east, trough, ridge, trough, and so on. And it looks like the pattern shift comes up right around the 1st. Yeah, going right into February there. And now it looks more like an Arctic pattern. And then it can persist all the way through mid-month there. So lots of opportunities here to push cold air southward. Let's take a look at temperature anomalies and see what we're looking at. And this is something different here. This is the, yeah, actually, let me go back and do the temperature anomaly here. Okay, so starting out right now, very benign, some places in the central and the west above normal. And we roll this forward. You can see Canada just slightly below normal. A little bit of cold air continuing there in western Alaska. And it looks like we start to develop some Arctic air there on the weekend in the Northwest Territories and northern Alberta. Wow, some very, very warm air there in Quebec. So we start developing Arctic air there already on the 28th. So some of it pushes southward into the eastern U.S. And we start recharging up in Yukon and the western Northwest Territories. And this next outbreak goes south around the 1st and 2nd. And this area continues developing. And we get one outbreak comes southward. And we develop more up north there. And that comes southward. And you can see this mostly affects the Midwest region. Now, the main problem that we have is we know that the pattern is there for polar outbreaks, but we just don't really know the details. And to kind of show you what we're up against, let me show you a loop here. This is for the 1st of February. This is, let me get this zoomed here. Okay, that's probably about as good as I can do. These are 5 different runs of the GFS going back about 2 days to the present time. So this is about 168 to 200 hours out. So this is what we were forecasting early on Monday morning. The GFS showing the 30,000 foot winds. And now I'm going to advance this at 12-hour steps for the same forecast time for the 1st at 0Z. So this is forecasting the very same time on the calendar. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so there's some pretty good consistency at this time on the 1st at 0Z. It's showing a bit of a trough right there, pretty large long wave ridge on the west coast, and a little bit of a flat ridge on the east coast. So from run to run, things look pretty decent. Some of the details are a little bit off. Okay, but if we take this out past the 1st, here's what it looks like. This is for the 6th at 12Z. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you can see some flip-flopping there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So at one point, the run for last night had this big positive tilt, major shortwave, major trough all the way out over California. Huge ridge over Alaska. And then when we went to this morning's run, it looked like this. So there's flip-flopping back and forth, and we don't really have good data out past about 220, 230 hours. What we do know is that where it is consistent, that's what we look for. And what I can see consistent here is long wave troughing in the east and central U.S. and long wave ridging along the west coast. So that much we do know, and that's really all we need for there to be a cold pattern here in the eastern 3/4 of the U.S. So I do think we are looking for a return to cold air as we get into the 1st and 2nd week of February, but the details we're just not too sure about right there. So I'll just let you see this one more time. It does look like it is bulking up that ridge along the west coast right in this area. So that would be a good pattern for dislodging some cold air. And then another detail I'll show you, I happen to spot this on the precipitable water. Okay, so again, we're looking at the GFS, precipitable water. And what I'm looking at is out here in the Pacific. Okay, so we see a big low spinning out there off British Columbia. And it looks like as we get towards the 27th or 28th, we get this monster low out here. And that looks definitely very energetic here. And we see that ahead of it, it slings this Pineapple Express into British Columbia. Okay, then when that's done, we get up to the 30th and 31st, and you see this other piece of moisture. Watch what happens to that. And you can see that it's like a huge wave just kind of breaking against the Alaska and British Columbia coast. Precipitable water 3/4 to 1/2 inch, well, 3/4 to 1.25 inches, all through here. And what's important is that this also not only hits the mountains, but crosses the mountains a bit. And we see some of that moisture come across into Yukon, British Columbia, and Alberta, and that can be a good pattern there for getting snow going in that area. And of course that means a good ingredient that we need for production of Arctic air. See, there it goes. This is on the 5th and 6th there. And looks like even some more moisture coming into there around the 8th and 9th. So yeah, that would be another feature we would look at. And let's go ahead and just put it together. Oh yeah, I guess I'll show you the snowfall. This is the total accumulated snowfall. You can see how stormy it is out there on the west coast. A couple systems cross Canada there. And wow, look at that. Offshore, if you had like an oil platform or something like that out there, you'd be getting about 8 to 10 inches of snow. And even halfway to Hawaii, getting about 3 to 4 inches of snow out there over the open waters. And snow tracks or storm tracks across Canada. So that's fresh snow being dumped there. And yeah, that's what we need for Arctic air production. Okay, so let's go ahead and find the chart first, and we'll take a look at the forecast. Okay, starting out, big high pressure across the eastern U.S. and low pressure. That's the easiest way to really handle it. Just look at the big picture. So we see low pressure out in this area here and high pressure in this region here. And that means kind of a mean southwesterly flow. So we're bringing some warm air up into the Rocky Mountain region. And we also see the development of some downslope flow. So kind of a warmer day there for Oklahoma and Kansas going into Friday. Looks like we get one system crossing the Rockies right there. I guess our system emerges out there in the central and northern plains. And then that's going to move into the Midwest, kind of a dry system initially. And then it looks like it does pick up some moisture there in Texas. You can see the Gulf is open. See those those isobars there? We've got flow coming onshore and feeding up to that front there. So it looks like possibly some showers in Texas for Saturday and Sunday. Yeah, there they get going. And let's see for next week. Oh, we get some Bear Clinic development offshore. So yeah, that'll affect Florida possibly on Sunday. And that's out of the picture. And then we get a high pressure area coming out of Canada. And this is probably the very start of maybe some polar air production up there. Get a migratory high, come southward. A little bit of a system off the east coast there. And you can see things get really stormy up there in Canada. So there's one system, and then we've got the lee side troughing. Kind of a windy day there in Colorado and Wyoming. And the system will move through Canada, and behind it, there's all that snow being dumped in Manitoba and Ontario. And looks like a bit of a cool down there for Nevada and Idaho and Wyoming. So for the first, this is probably when we start transitioning over to that other pattern. Things start cooling down up north. You can see the pressures up here coming up into the 1040s. A little bit of snow there in the Ohio Valley. And there goes one high pressure system. And then here comes another infusion of polar air coming south for the second. And that dives southward. And then around the 4th or 5th, that covers most of the eastern and central U.S. there. And looks like the model going for a little bit of a wave there. Kind of an upper level system producing pressure falls around the 4th or 5th in Oklahoma. But, you know, this is 288 hours out. We don't know that for sure. And then towards the end of the pattern, here comes a 1040 millibar high. This is kind of another reinforcing shot of cold air coming southward. And I think we will see that those frames probably vary a lot, probably see a much different picture tomorrow. Well, I'm not going to say a much different picture, but I think we'll see it vary from run to run here, anything out past 220 hours out. But I do think it is going to probably shape up as being cold, probably in this part of the country here. So some more winter to look forward to. Okay, let me take a look at the chart here, or the chat. A little discussion about 83 there. Like the historic analysis. Yeah, I appreciate that, Burrow. Ryan, remembering those brutal cold years. Yeah, the 80s seemed like it was a really cold decade. I mean, we had January of 82. We had the Freezer Bowl that year. That game, was that the FC in Cincinnati, I think? They were playing out there in like 5 or 0 degree weather, and then we had 83 and early 85. Colorado hit its coldest temperature ever, and then 86 and 87 was kind of warm. 88, yeah, and then 89 we had that really bad cold snap, and then 90, late 90, another bad one. Discussion about agriculture there. Ryan says his in-laws controlled 125,000 acres of citrus there. Large producer. Irma wiped out 2/3 of the entire crop. Yeah, sorry to hear that. Sue M. mentioning another snowstorm. 5th and 6th already canceled snow due to other snowstorm. Florida Keys still cleaning up back area canals, and Marina still backed up with storm debris. Man, yeah, we had quite a hurricane season. The lower Florida Keys still missing out on the tourist season and recovery, rough on local business. Ron Chalfant says, click the like button. Thank you very much. And Andrew hoping the Canadian Arctic air has enough time to recharge. Suem says, Punxsutawney Phil still has a say about winter. Yeah, most definitely. Okay, well, that's probably about all I got for this evening. I appreciate you all watching the webcast, and thank you for joining. And hopefully we will see you. Sorry, hang on, let me get the levels now. Don't want any feedback. Anyway, thank you for watching, and hopefully we'll see you all tomorrow. Take care.